Supernatural Woman and the Male Initiate, Bonded Through Dreams by Angel Millar, now
Yeah.
out. And a very timely topic, I think. So, and you got a quote from Ralph Tegmeyer on the back, which is pretty awesome.
Yeah, well, he's given me one for a couple of books now, which is very nice. But yeah, so this was not a book I intended to write at all, and I was actually writing a series of essays on various subjects, and then it just started to grow, and I realized at some point that this was a, a subject that I wanted to explore more deeply, which meant at that point writing a book. But at the same time, I was having certain experiences, especially in dreams, that paralleled what was kind of bubbling up to the surface in my own research as well. So that also made it imperative that I study this subject. But yeah, so that was really the genesis of this book.
So let's start off with defining how you define supernatural woman and how you define male initiate, because those are pretty big ones. So maybe we should make sure we're
Yeah.
starting with defining terms.
Yeah, that's a good point, especially in this day and age. So, so yeah, so the supernatural woman. I'm not really talking about any woman who's supernatural. What I discovered in my research is that there's a particular, you could say, a particular category of supernatural woman who appears to men. And is associated with speech, oracular speech, poetic speech, writing to a certain degree, and dreams and death. And of course, with that, with inspiration and the transformation of consciousness. So although you could say a succubus would be a supernatural woman, or a goddess would be a supernatural woman, I would say that this book is about unearthing a certain category of a supernatural woman. As to the male initiate, you could debate whether some of the figures that experience this are really initiated, and maybe not. In some cases, there's plenty of, say, Norse sagas or Icelandic tales based on Norse mythology and Norse sagas that the male was not necessarily initiated in any kind of formal sense, but is seemingly a person of character. And this was definitely an aspect that I found being repeated, that it's not just, or it may not even be the cultivation of, say, magical secrets, but is much more the cultivation of the character. I suppose you could say, rather like a relationship, that the other person in the relationship during the dating period wants to see that you're a person of character and
Mhm.
doesn't necessarily care if you are the greatest magician or the greatest artist or the greatest banker that has ever lived. So I think in that sense, it's very much reflective of a human to human relationship. But yes, I think this cultivation of the character is something that maybe we don't see quite so much of in the occult world.
Cultivation of character at all,
Right.
or yes.
Yeah.
Um, and then so and this one is always tricky, but we should also define what initiation means,
Yeah. Right. Yeah. We should.
and that's a tough one. I know it's a very tough one.
Yeah, well, I suppose initiation just means to begin something. Um, I mean, this is something I've really been thinking about over the last few days. So my thoughts might be a little bit disjointed, but I hear when I listen to podcasts, for example, about the occult, I hear everything being referred to as a tradition. So someone will say, "Oh, the runic tradition," or whatever it is. And on the one hand, you think, well, that makes sense. And I do write about runes in there and Norse mythology. But whenever I've heard this, I've felt like it's not a tradition. Yeah, and that seems like a weird thing to think, considering we're really going back at least, well, the earliest runic find, I believe, is now about 100, 150 years. BCE. So,
Wow.
so about 2,000 years, let's say. So, why isn't it a tradition? And I think that a lot of the time, what we're talking about are not traditions, but movements. And I think these two are
Mm,
very different. And I think, for example, that Freemasonry, particular craft Freemasonry, and an apprentice fellow craft master mason, is a tradition. But I think that other things are not necessarily, and not that one is better than the other either necessarily, but a tradition is based on the idea that we don't want it to change. We want to keep doing this thing and we don't want to change it. And it might change over time, but the point is to preserve it and keep it intact as much as possible. Whereas a movement is usually about we need to change something or we want to expand something, but
mm,
and a movement could also be we want to get back to the original thing. But there's always a kind of movement in it. It's not about keeping things the same. It's usually about changing something. And I think if you want to be initiated into a tradition, um, there has to be some physical contact. So in Freemasonry, there's the grip. So your hand clasps the hand of the lodge master, who clasped the hand of his lodge master when he was initiate, and so on and so forth. And but I think in movements, there's no need for there to be a kind of physical contact. That what a movement really is being inspired by some kind of idea or some kind of aesthetic. And it may be the case that many traditions, at least, are based on the idea of a mystery, which is perhaps why they want to keep everything exactly as is. Because
uh,
if we're entering into a mystery, we need to prepare really fully for it. So we want to follow these same footsteps. Whereas I think a movement is often based on some kind of idea and maybe even some kind of dogma. So we know we're right, so that we don't need to follow these particular steps because we know we're right. We can kind of expand our ideas. Our ideas and our beliefs can even change or morph around this central idea or contradict what we said earlier. Or we can create new kind of aesthetics or new artwork or new expressions, whether that's pop songs or Masonic rituals or occult rituals or whatever it is. So I think, let's say, just sticking with the runes. So I think the runes is not a tradition; it's a movement in this day and age. That people want to develop their own rituals, their own organizations. As far as I know, even in the Rune Guild, which would probably come closest to a tradition, even there, the creating a masterwork is creating something new. So it's much more like a movement.
mm.
But so I don't think you necessarily need to be initiated into a movement. In fact, you can self-initiate by kind of identifying with it. But I think if you're going to be initiated into a tradition, there has to be this um, adhering to the tradition and some kind of physical proximity to it as well.
Yeah, that's interesting, and at least I don't know about you, but kind of where I've come to that. It's interesting you raised the runes in the Rune Guild because this is a good example. A lot of these things that people are saying are traditions go back basically to the baby boomers and
Right.
the
Or less.
neo-pagan
Yeah.
revival, and
Yeah.
whether it's left or right, and so they carry the fundamental assumptions of the search of that generation for an identity in a community outside of, I don't know, the 1950s reality. And so they're all expressions of boomerism, and that could be everything from Ram Dass to Stephen Flowers.
Right.
And that's fine. I think that like that, but people should be honest about what's rediscovery. I know with runes, right? It's like correct me if I'm wrong, but we have the rune stones, but we don't really know what people
Mhm.
did with them. We have the sagas, although it's quite possible they were created by Christian missionaries as a bridge to conversion. And then, as far as I know, what we think of as rune magic now is basically reconstructed I mean, there was the stuff in Germany, but was more or less reconstructed by Stephen Flowers and that whole group of people.
Yeah,
And
I
I don't
think
think there's
so.
anything wrong with that. You shouldn't,
Yeah,
like, we should be clear about, or rather, I would say we should be more confident in saying this is mine, other than
right,
saying this
exactly.
came from this, all the way back to Theos. It came from the masters and secret shit.
That's it.
Well, what if it just came from you and it's a good idea?
Exactly. Yeah, that's it. And I think you've touched on something essential here, and that is, let's say we just accept that both movements and traditions are equally valid and equally good, and let's not even think about the negative sides of either of them. Um, what we might say is these are two different ways of expressing the genius. So the movement is okay. I like that idea and that aesthetic. Let me create new things from my own mind, my own genius, and embody it in some new way. And then the tradition is okay. Let me learn this path, these footsteps, what I need to do, and then at some point if it really is a mystery, there should be some leaping off into the mystery or through it so that you express what you have absorbed in a new, express the mystery in a new way that kind of revives it.
Hmm. What's it?
But
Go ahead. Go ahead. Go
yeah,
ahead.
yeah. So I think in relation to the book, yeah, there is this idea very much implicit and maybe explicit in it that the initiation or the supernatural woman that appears does spark the genius in some way. And although it may be that many of the people in it, or many of the people who have experienced this, are not initiated themselves, the experience of this supernatural woman appearing is itself some kind of initiation that she illuminates the consciousness.
I think, yeah, and also to bring it right back to your book, I think that in my experience, at least, you have traditions, you have movements, but you know, uh, not to be cheesy about this, but woman is the living initiation, right? And that's not that you see that in traditions. You see in the
Hmm.
Eastern traditions, you go through the tantric traditions. First, you have the guru,
Hmm. Yeah.
but then you're initiated by the dakini, not the guru.
Hmm.
And
Right.
same. It's obviously there in Thelema, although a bit distorted. It's even there
Hmm.
in John Dee, although distorted. And But if you look at this stuff clearly, even the Book of the Law, like all of these transmissions come through women or are interpreted by men,
Right.
and often misinterpreted or overly
Yeah.
constructed around. But I think that um, that has certainly been my experience.
Right.
How you
Yes.
feel about that? But yeah, that's kind of
Yeah.
another way of saying it's like that's when the real work starts too.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. Well, yeah, I certainly experienced something similar to this, and I was someone who was a little bit resistant to the idea of initiation from women, not because I think women are lesser, but because I have seen plenty of bad behavior by men over the years of uh, seeming to use spirituality and esotericism to
Yeah.
attract girlfriends, or at least try to attract girlfriends, usually hopelessly failing. But
Yeah,
but
it's almost like women can tell. It's
I'm
almost like
sure.
women can tell.
Yeah, I'm
Yeah,
sure.
yeah.
Yeah.
So you had struggled with that idea for a bit because of that reason?
Yeah, partly. I mean, I've taken several initiations. Some of them of value to me, and some not really at all. Um, and the quality of the initiators and the groups varying very significantly. But it was by coincidence always by men. So even I was involved in a neo-pagan group when I was 17, but and there were women in it, but the group leader was a man. And then when I was initiated into the Illuminates of Thanatos, I think there was only one woman present at my
Really?
initiation, maybe two
There were a ton
most.
more there were a ton more when I was there it was more gender equal when I was there in the mid-2000s. So
Yeah, this was
not as much in the
19.
U.S. The U.S. was more male.
Oh, really? Is that right? Yeah. I mean, this was 1990 in London, and there was only one woman in the temple that I joined for at least for probably about 6 months, and then another woman joined, and there was about eight of us, so it was definitely very male dominated. But I respect. I kind of appreciated being initiated by men, because that seems to be something quite archaic in itself, but unnecessary for
Yeah.
me. I think partly because I have always tended to be more artistic and more sensitive, and so I think I felt I needed that, and I think I probably did need that. In fact, I definitely needed that. But at a certain point over the last few years, I realized that this was not the ending, and there was something beyond that.
Hmm. And in the book, you don't just talk about the physical women, right? You also talk about
Right,
a raven-haired woman who began appearing in your dreams. You talk about
right.
but also you talk about being careful about attributing, what's actually an autonomous intelligence, or the other, just saying, oh, it's all the anima, and that is a
Yeah.
huge, forgive me, fertile ground of discussion. And I'm curious your thoughts on that.
Yeah, so I do look at the anima, and I spent quite a bit of time reading Emma Jung, Carl Jung's wife, on the anima.
Mhm.
Um, let's come back to that in a minute, but because I've had some issues with what I was reading, but yeah, in my personal life, yeah, this raven-haired woman kept turning up in my dreams, and I was also doing some what we might call channeling, though I find that word to be inadequate. At the same time, and what was coming through was very definitely this goddess, which after doing some research, seemed to be a Dravidian Hindu deity that I'd actually never
Hmm.
heard of, and so that in itself was quite revelatory. In fact, very much so. And these two things coming at the same time was quite transformative. But yeah, I do talk in the book about the one particular dream I had where I used to have recurring nightmares, and were very disturbing. And I had them for years, and then one night or one early morning, I felt myself going into one of these nightmares, and then all of a sudden, out of nowhere, this beautiful naked woman wrapped herself around me, and the nightmare just faded away and has never come back. I'm very glad to say,
Hmm.
since then, and that's probably about 3 years, maybe even a little more at this point, and so that in itself has been a real transformation. But the naked woman, obviously, people will immediately think, "Oh, this is a sexual thing, or this male fantasies, or whatever it might be." Men and women both have fantasies, so I'm not sure why male fantasies are so bad. But 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 it was certainly not sexual, and I certainly did not feel sexually aroused. It just felt completely protective, and hence the nightmare faded away. And I think, well, for me, it was very revelatory. Um, Not least of all because, of course, if we were to ask a psychologist or a therapist, they would say, "Well, that's just some part of your psyche that somehow part of you was dreading going into this nightmare, and you were entering this nightmare, but some other part of you then rescued you from it." And to me, it all becomes more complicated than just saying that it's somehow from outside of me. I'm not sure how
That
you.
is funny how often magic is the most obvious answer.
Right. Right. Yeah, that's right, that's right. And, even if we were to think that, well, no, okay, it's not outside of me, I can say that the more I have thought of it as autonomous to me, the more it has behaved like it is autonomous to me. So, yeah, so let's just even say that psychiatry or whatever could come along and prove that it was internal to me. It still wouldn't stop me from treating it as an autonomous being, because that seems to be um, what well, maybe not makes it seem autonomous, but it seems to encourage it to act in an autonomous way. So why would I want to limit that? That would be crazy,
That seems like a very deep comment about magic in general.
right?
A
Could
lot of
be.
interesting.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
And, as someone who is concerned about language as a writer and also an editor, um, yeah, I think we have to be very careful about the language we use about things. And one of the problems with most people whose writing I read, everything is very approximate. Or
hmm,
they use these incredibly flowery words when they could use a simpler and much more accurate word because they're insecure. And then the grammar is very confused. And so you get this sort of rich stew of terms that no one would ever use, but the actual logic is really not there. And for people that talk about how, well, spell is is both a magical spell and writing,
uh,
or grimoire is really related to the term grammar, which just meant not a knowledge of some a foundational knowledge at some point. But yeah, okay, but then we need to be really careful about the words we're using about these things. And since Jung, particularly, we have tended to talk about it as if these things are just purely internal and just some aspect of my psyche, you know.
yeah, and I definitely want to circle back to you. But before we do, you mentioned the transformation. So I'm curious about the transformation that you went through, in terms of
Yeah,
what, autonomous or not. But it sounds that this was a profound, transformative, initiatory period of your life, which sounds like it's still
yeah,
ongoing. So
yeah, because
how'd that progress?
yeah, so there was definitely an internal transformation. Of course, the most obvious thing being that these nightmares disappeared, which were really horrible and disturbing. So I'm glad about that. So there was an internal transformation, but then things started changing in my own life as well in ways that I really would not have expected. In fact, it was really the last things I would have expected. So changes in relationships and yeah, really put some very and some difficult changes as well. But yeah, in ways I would not have imagined at this point in my life. So yeah, it's not been an easy time, but it's probably been a necessary one.
Hmm, interesting.
Yeah,
I also want to touch on a comment you made about channeling being inadequate, an inadequate organ
yeah,
phenomenon, and I didn't want to let that go. I'm curious what
yeah,
you mean by that.
yeah. I just well, I think a lot of our terms are inadequate, and maybe if we lived in maybe if we lived in India or Thailand, maybe we would think that the terms we were using there are inadequate as well. Maybe that's just human nature, but I do think that Western, or let's say the English language, is a little bit inadequate in its terminology, partly because it gets hijacked by you know quite flaky New Age people often, or a few years ago I studied hypnotism, and it's kind of interesting that hypnotism and magic are terms that are also associated with stage fakery and stage bravado and trickery, both of them. But hypnotism itself, the term only goes back to the middle of the 19th century, but the tradition of hypnotism and the practice before that word was created,
Hmm.
um,
So more mesmerism.
yeah, mesmerism or magnetism, that was completely integrated into ceremonial magic. So Madame Blavatsky says that mesmerism, which we would now call hypnotism, she said that mesmerism is the most important branch of magic. And uh,
Really?
yeah, and Papou said that during the 19th century said that. all magical adepts and folk sorcerers or village sorcerers practice magnetism. So this,
Do you know a guy named he used to go by Monas. His
oh,
name is Lee, and for some reason I'm blanking on his last name. He lives in London, and he is just kind of he's always around the occult world, and he fully studied mesmerism, and that he doesn't do hypnosis. He only does mesmerism.
I
Here,
don't.
here he is. Interesting guy.
Yeah,
Anyways, he's just one of those
yeah.
guys that like for some reason lots of people in the occult no. He's just
Oh,
around.
interesting. Yeah, I've
Anyways,
never heard of him, but I do know that. Well, I can say that mesmerism is now being practiced in America as well. So out of
right.
New York,
I
not
see.
me, but yeah,
Okay.
yeah,
And that one has more about like there's like baths and magnetic passes, and it's like what's the deal with those? What is it?
yeah. I don't think the baths thing is being practiced. It's more. It seems to me more like a practice of Reiki, but with a lot of visualization as well. But yeah, it's much more about manipulating the energy.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So we've talked about men initiating other men is critical,
Mhm.
and and it's I think we've even talked about this before on podcasts. It's like
Probably.
the crisis of male initiation
Yeah.
is pretty odd. Like men require initiation from older men, or they go
Yeah.
nuts. You know,
Yeah.
in the
Totally.
same way as if they don't have fathers, they go nuts.
Yeah.
And
That's
they need
right.
both, and they need both, right?
Yeah.
Um, but male initiation by women. My wife and I have been talking a lot about looking at I mean, just the fact that the female witchcraft, like the women-led witchcraft movement, is so much more successful than
Hmm.
anything on the male ceremonial side,
Hmm.
and how that and I think how important that is going forward, particularly in exploring uh, civilizational alternatives to Abrahamic religions. On the other
Yeah.
hand, as you have mentioned in this podcast, and you talk about in the book, um, you talk about, in your involvement with neo-paganism where you had, quote, goddesses and priestesses who were being exalted verbally, but really that whole thing was just set up to conceal male sexual agendas.
Yeah.
That's really important. And I'd love to hear you talk about that a bit.
Yeah. This was a long time ago. It would have been a little under 40 years ago. So I was pretty young. I mean, I was like 17 at the time, 17, 18. And yeah, I came across a shop near where I lived. Actually, some friends took me there. And there was a sort of, they described it as a hippie shop, I think, but it had a couple of bookcases selling occult books. And the character running it was a very charismatic guy, of course, very charismatic, very likable. Spoke with authority, partly because he didn't know how much he didn't know, but and there wasn't very many avenues to access this kind of knowledge at that time, which would have been around, I guess, 1988, somewhere. It's 1987, something like that, and yeah, and I was not having the best of time. I was, working occasionally and not working a lot, and I ended up spending more and more time at the shop, and really just spending entire days there, and then hanging out there, talking about magic, and reading books from these bookcases, and the very positive aspect of it was that the guy that was behind it all really did convey that, well, it's not all shopping centers, it's not all this modern pollution and stuff, and the problems of the world. There's something magical and romantic and mystical embedded in the world that we inhabit, and it's in nature. Maybe it comes through dreams as well and in feelings. And I think that was very, very positive. But the negative side was, there was a clear conflict. On the one hand, he wanted to convey actual knowledge about these things, on the other hand, his livelihood depended on you buying books. So there was immediately a conflict, and then he set up a group, but of course he always had to be the most knowledgeable. So it was so on the one hand, he didn't want you to he wanted to give you knowledge because then you wouldn't buy the books. On the other hand, if you bought too many books, then he started to become suspicious of you because now you know more than him. And so then there would be this kind of gossip about you about, oh, well, don't you know I've read his astrology chart and he's a black magician, as was said about me, some
Oh,
18-year-old kid.
that must have been an ego hit. That's pretty cool to be considered a black magician at 17. That's great.
For sure. I really went with my long hair and my black jacket, my black leather jacket. I was like, wow, cool. I'm like destined to be a black magician. So then I joined the IoT. So it's sort of self-fulfilling prophecy.
That's great.
But yeah, but and there were some good things. Otherwise, maybe there was a little bit more of an expression of emotions or whatever in this group, which was good, coming from this very emotionally stunted modern England, where expressing one's emotions, especially for a man, is quite verboten. But at the same time, there was a lot of hugging the women. What it was is, oh, we're being pagan or kissing the women. This is just really pagan. But there was clearly this sort of sad desperation of wanting he had a girlfriend, but they were always fighting and splitting up. But so there was this sense of like clinging or trying to get an attractive girlfriend or being too obsessed about women. And I said, and I'm sure we've all seen this in all kinds of scenarios, but one hopes that it
I'm
is
sure
not.
that
And
everyone
it's
who's gonna look, everyone, I'm sure that almost everyone who's watching this will have seen the type.
yeah, that's right. Yeah, and I've seen it in other sort of spiritual groups. They're not immune to it. It's dreadful, but uh, but yeah, one hopes that not to see this sort of which is very weak behavior, really. Um, I was out with some ceremonial magicians and Rosicrucians, all very powerful stuff, years ago. We went to a restaurant, and they all got completely drunk and were hitting on the waitress, who was very attractive, but they were hitting on the waitress and calling her name and trying to get her attention. I thought, good grief, it's like being around a bunch of school kids almost. And it's like, what is going on? It's not just that it's overstepping the bounds a little bit. It's also that it's extraordinarily weak behavior. That woman is not going to be interested in you when you behave like that.
Yeah.
She's just not. Well, why would she be?
I think that weak is a really good way to describe it. My experience, I think that, if you need to set up some type of group to attract women or you need to join a group, one thing that I appreciate about the chaos magic scene during my time is that at least at that point in the 2000s, I don't know how practiced it was, but it was generally discouraged to date within an order. And
Right.
it was considered a sign of personal failure if you couldn't if you couldn't hold down a job, if you couldn't even attract anyone without being weird, so
Right. Yeah.
and I mean, but that type of behavior that you're talking about just shows, I mean, it says everything, right?
It does.
If we talk about initiation, it's people demonstrate. We don't even have to use the word initiation, but people demonstrate their character under pressure. They also demonstrate their character often when out at restaurants with wait staff,
Right.
interestingly enough,
Yeah,
when
that's
there's
right.
somebody that they see as in service to them
Yeah.
or that they can't get anything from, that's often when you see how people actually are, in my experience.
Yeah, definitely. I've had a lot of women say that, especially about, men. Will try and impress them by being really nasty to the waitress, and it has the
Sure.
opposite effect. I mean, I'm sure it's not that common, but it's common enough, obviously. So,
Yeah, man. So what do you attribute that to? I mean, I don't want to cast aspersions on any traditions or anything like that, but you can't you can't help but notice when people are
Yeah.
real caught up in this kind of like, basically pseudo-Christian
Yeah.
Abrahamic ceremonial thing where they're just cut off
Yeah.
from themselves and from nature and from
Yeah.
sometimes just basic decency and politeness. Not all,
Yeah.
you know.
Yeah, one of the one person I'm thinking of more than any of them, I won't say his name obviously, but he has this very pleasant kind of new age type philosophy of we're all one, and which I personally detest.
Right.
But and I think, I mean, if I had to psychoanalyze him, and I'm not a psychoanalyst, I would say that the, that he gives no, he doesn't, he's not able to air any kind of real masculinity. There's nothing aggressive about him, which nothing fierce about him at all. And and so to me, it always feels like this kind of, well, we're all one. It's a kind of mask. It's not that, oh, I've genuinely reached some elevated spiritual level. It's more like a disguise. And then this sort of behavior comes out after a couple of glasses of wine at a restaurant. Not that it was aggressive, but it was not very sophisticated. Let's put it
Mhm.
that way.
I've often found that we're all one often means your boundaries don't matter.
Well, yeah, well, that's what it implies, right? Because they certainly don't live like that. I've never met anyone who lives like we're all one, that's for sure.
Yes. Um, Man, another question I want to, when we talk about boundaries, another one that's critical when we talk about female initiator
Yeah.
magic in general, just life in general, and you touch on this in the book, is distinguishing between what's projection and what's not. Because you also get um men who just like this is like they completely surrender all of their power to
Hmm.
obsessing over one woman, and this is the one goddess and all of that.
Yeah.
And also, I think that here's an example, right? Jack Parsons and Marjorie Cameron. I went to go see the Cameron exhibit in at Mocha when it was there, and they produced a book for it of Cameron called "Songs for the Witch Woman," which had an introduction by Bill Breeze, and he knew Cameron, and outside of anything about the OTO or anything like that,
Mm.
he says in his introduction that he met her in the '90s when I guess she would have been in her '70s, and she was kind of like a hippie woman doing tai chi in the park, and
Yeah.
but he said that she was still caught up in what Jack Parsons had projected on her, which is she is Babylon and she is the goddess, and she was still essentially caught up in his construction.
Mm.
And that he thought that that was not healthy for her. It was not good for
No.
her, and that this kind of it's interesting. It's like when I was younger, it's Jack Parsons seemed like the coolest guy ever. Now he seems very childish to me in many ways. And that's one of them.
Mm.
I think that was, and Bill Breeze thought that that was perhaps unfair to her. And that's very much the danger with this topic. That's one of the many dangers with this topic. And I'm
Yeah.
curious, we see it. You also mention it in the book. You talk about people get obsessed now with this twin flames idea. That's an even more extreme version of it. I'm curious
Right.
what you think about delineating that.
Yeah, it's difficult, and it probably says something about the spiritual or religious poverty of the age that we're in, and maybe partly because we psychologize everything. In a way, Jung kind of freed us to explore the esoteric and not feel frightened by it. But on the other hand, I think it's had the very negative effect that now everything just feels like it's psychology in a world in which everything is turned into a kind of therapy as well, where we must be safe. And you expressed an opinion that upset someone, even though it's factually correct, and this is has caused them to suffer PTSD or trauma, and a lot of the words we use are straight out of psychotherapy as well. Trauma. Um, I forget what else now, but we use a lot of them. Phobia.
Mm.
And we use these. Oh, yeah, everybody now claims to be, have ADHD. So some, I'm sure some of them will, but a lot of people just use it very casually. And
Well,
we
another
tend
part
to,
of that is diagnostic criteria have improved. So a lot of people are being there's a bit of a optical illusion with that. For instance, autism, where tons more people are being diagnosed. So people look at that and say, like, either people are clinging on to a trend, or they're being misdiagnosed and by the pharmaceutical industry or something like this. But the reality is our diagnostic criteria.
yeah,
And I
yeah.
do think trauma is very,
Oh,
very,
yeah.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah, these things are real, but what I find, at least in New York, a lot of people that don't have these things or will self-diagnose, as having
Right.
them, even though they don't,
Well, we use
because it's just,
phobia.
yeah,
I'm sorry, we use phobia in a very cultural fashion. We don't need to mention the obvious ones, but
right, right,
it's
exactly,
like I
yeah,
always say, it's like phobia is an irrational fear.
right.
Sometimes fear is rational. Yeah.
Yeah, that's it. That's it. But yeah, all of these terms from psychoanalysis analysis has entered into our everyday world. So we kind of, we speak a lot of Freudianism. We speak a lot of psychoanalysis. So yeah, but sorry, I forget your question now.
Well, I probably do too. Well, let's talk about psychology and Freud. Oh, it was about. I do want to talk about psychology and Freudianism, but my question was about the line at which projection is happening, where
Yeah,
the male is projecting on a woman that is also just a human being.
yeah, that's right. Yeah. Well, yeah, that's a really good question. And there's probably no short answer how to not do that. Well, I mean, of course, you need to develop yourself um, and not be kind of clinging on the other person. And I mean, there are practical things you can do. Obviously, you don't be clinging, think about yourself and invest time in yourself and not needing to be with this person all the time or bothering them. And this happens with both men and women. It happens both ways. I notice, but if it's something like a dream, um, and people get obsessed about this as well, and they think that something life changing has happened in a single dream. I think we can dream all kinds of mystical things, and sometimes they're or seemingly mystical. Sometimes they're important, sometimes they're not. And I think with that kind of phenomenon, the only thing to do is really give it time and see what happens. Is it repeating? Is it's showing up in your life in some other way with these weird coincidences that keep
Mhm.
happening, which I was definitely experiencing a
Or more
lot.
like you're being forced to pay attention to it.
Yeah, that's right. Does it feel like you're really, really being forced to pay attention, or does it feel like you're forcing the connections? And to be honest about that is very difficult. And I would say this: my first three books were all completely straight-laced histories with no real interpretation, and you get other authors who write quote unquote histories, and it's basically just fantasy. And you read it and you think, well, that's kind of cool. It's kind of interesting. It's kind of fun. It's not really true. But my objection to those books and those authors is not that they're getting attention or that they've written something that the gullible people believe, or that they have made a claim about look how magical it is. It's that actually as magical as their claims are, and as wrong as they are, when you get into the real thing, it's always much more magical. It's always much more
Mm.
interesting. Even the most boring things have a history that takes you somewhere interesting. And then, especially when you start looking at the people involved and the characters, people are always very interesting and contradictory and do things that you wouldn't expect. And I think that the more you get into the facts, the more interesting it is. And the same with this urge. You have a dream and you think, oh, I really want it to be magical, and can I misinterpret it in a certain way, or can I force it? But when you have the confidence to say, that was an interesting dream. Let me just see. Maybe it is, maybe it isn't. And then that sort of opens up the possibility for really interesting things to happen. But it requires a little bit of confidence and patience, and and even the confidence for things not to occur. Like, is it okay if nothing ever happens? Or can we just feel that there is something inherently magical about the world that we inhabit, and it doesn't matter if we have these mystical experiences or not. That that just life is kind of mystical, and and I've had these experiences, but which have been has been great, but I don't want to wait for these periodic experiences to feel that the world is magical. I want to feel that it's just magical as it is, and I can appreciate the most ordinary thing as a kind of
Mhm.
magical thing in itself. Friendship, decent food, whatever it is,
Mhm.
that's enough.
Yeah. Yeah. I agree completely. Yeah, it's like people always want things to have a special effects budget.
Yeah,
And it's like, what if it's just like this whole,
yeah,
and people are always looking for evidence of magic. It's like this whole universe is a rabbit pulled out of a hat with no
yeah,
explanation whatsoever. And this is the most wonderful possible thing we have,
yeah,
and so that I
exactly.
feel it's so much more about a shift in perception
Yeah.
and appreciation.
Yeah, I must just tell you very quickly this. I used to go and stay in a monastery years and years ago when I was in England, and I had one particular friend there, a monk, and I asked him, "Why did you choose this monastery to stay in?" And at that point, I was kind of looking for him to say more mystical things, and he would always say the most ordinary thing, which I felt frustrating at the time, I think, but I realized later on just how profound they were. But he said that when he went to visit different monasteries, he came to this one, and there was this a monk who had dwarfism. He was like literally a dwarf, and he had given up living in the monastery grounds, which are quite beautiful, and he lived in a hut in the woods,
Mhm.
and lived basically as a hermit. And then he said to this old monk, the old dwarfish monk who was dying at the time, he said, "But well, aren't you comforted knowing that after you die, you'll be with Jesus?" And this dwarf monk said to him, "Well, it's just a hope." I mean, he'd given up his entire life and was living in a hut in the woods. He'd given up everything, but he still wasn't going to say, I've got the absolute truth and I know. And it says in the gospel, and therefore it's absolutely true. He says it's just a hope. But he did it, dedicated his entire life to it. And he wasn't fanatical about it. He just lived it.
What did you take from that?
Well, I took from it, well, I think that it is important not to want proof. I think one of the weaknesses, and it's probably not just the Western mind, but certainly the Western mind and magic and religion as well, the people want proof. And I've reached the stage where I don't want proof. I just want the mystery. And I don't really care where a particular tarot card goes on the Kabbalah, or what God in this system is equal to a God in that system. I don't really need to. I don't really need the details. I'm more interested in sort of feeling the mystery in a sense. I get a lot of people come up to me when I give talks, and sometimes they'll say things to me that are supposed to be very esoteric, but to me just sound like fundamentalist religion. That, well,
Mhm.
I know
Yeah.
what will happen after death because I read this book or whatever, and I don't know what will happen after death. But
Right. Good luck.
but, what's wrong with that?
I love that. I've more or less come to the same feeling where for me the mystery is for and for me the mystery is feminine. It is the infinite
Yeah.
darkness, mystery Babylon.
Right.
It's being okay with not knowing. It's
Yeah.
that's it's like, why do you want to know? Right? It's
Yeah.
like you're into magic, right? It's like,
Right.
don't you want the
Yeah.
experience of the numinous that you can't pin
Right.
down like a butterfly? What
Yeah.
if and this is a thing, what if you know, what if you don't have to try to control everything with these lattices of Kabbalistic,
Yeah.
or whatever it is?
Yeah,
Men,
that's it.
there's a certain type, there's a certain thing that men do where um, they have to define and pin down everything. I
Yeah.
think recently, even with the figure of Babylon, Babylon appears to John Dee and Edward Kelly. They can't handle it. Babylon appears to Crowley. He can't handle it. It's like,
Mhm.
and Babylon appears to Jack Parsons. He can't handle it. And I think that it's almost, you can see this as like that perhaps a mystery Babylon, perhaps a personification of that mystery, kind of like
Yeah.
touching into our reality from outside of time. And every time she does, these male supposed initiates try to build these scaffoldings to explain
Yeah.
entirely that aren't the thing.
Yeah, that's it. And I think mastery in anything is actually being it's transcending the system, right? So you want to learn something really well, which means learning all of the lessons and the techniques and everything, whether it's an art or a martial art. But at some point, you have to say, I just can't keep repeating this. I just have to leap off of it in some way. And this may be a really weird analogy, but we've all seen these guys. Usually they're young, and they will go around saying, "Oh, no one could defeat me in a street fight because I would give them a left jab and then a right hook." And it's like anything could happen. Like he could have five friends behind you. It could punch you in the face before you even know. There is no, but they think that I've got the technique, so now I'm safe. But actually, someone who really knows street fighting or martial arts or whatever it is knows that you can't pre-plan. You're just going to have to be in the moment and, in a sense, in this kind of mystery.
Interesting. Do you think that, and I am going to draw an obvious analogy out of this, but do you think that people who are in that stage where they think they can are actually far more vulnerable than the
Oh yeah,
average person because now they're
definitely.
overconfident and they'll put
Yes.
themselves in that situation?
Yeah. Well, they're basically telling you, I can only envision one type of attack on the street, and that's going to be one guy facing me, and it hasn't even conceived. Or what if he's got a friend behind you, or you're in a he punched you because he saw that you were looking in the other direction, and now you're punch drunk. There's all kinds of
Or someone just
situations.
comes up and knifes you. I mean, it's like
Exactly.
I had a coworker who was just at a it was so sad because he was here from Africa, and he was at an ATM in LA, and somebody just came up and stabbed him in his kidney.
Yeah.
He was getting money. It's like, that's violence.
Yeah.
It's like, it doesn't make sense, you know? It's like people
Yeah.
don't fight fair, you know?
No, for sure.
They're not in a competition with you. They don't,
That's right.
so they just
Yeah.
wanna hurt you and get what they want.
Yeah.
And I think that, and the analogy I would draw is a lot of times when people are in that stage where they have to do everything, they get overconfident in magic, they have to do
Yeah.
everything the right way and things like that. I think that in my experience, often those people experience much less magic in the world. And,
Yeah.
for instance, every time that I've heard someone, I've never seen a UFO, right? But every time I've heard someone tell me about a UFO or some crazy UFO experience,
Yeah.
or somebody talks about it in like a truly wild out of body experience or something like that, during a car accident or situations like that, it's always what you would think is a completely normal person. Right,
Yeah.
not a
Yeah.
magician, and I think there's something about, lust of result there and
Yeah.
wanting something really bad and so often, people are much
Yeah.
closer to the mystery when they stop trying to pin it down.
That's right. Yeah. I met this guy who was very into um projecting chi in martial arts. And I've seen a demonstration of chi that I really thought was one of the fakest things I've ever seen. But and he said to me, he said, "Oh, I was at this martial arts conference and I was sitting next to this guy who's really well known for his like chi power, and I was sitting next to him and I was projecting my chi through my the third eye at him, and he turned around and he said, 'Nice try.'" And I was like, "Yeah, that's because you were sitting at next to him, looking like a maniac, trying to project your chi into him. It's not that he felt your chi; it's he knew what you were doing. I would know what you were doing."
That's really
You know?
funny. That's
Yeah,
really funny. Well, you mentioned Emma Young, and I wanna now talk about psychoanalysis. For me, psychoanalysis is poisoned at the root, and what I
right.
mean by that is, I think one of the most shocking things I've ever read is, which I recommend for everyone, is there's a book called Trauma and Recovery by Judith Herman, and, she talks about the language, you know, the everything, the things that came out of the '60s feminism movement that allowed people, that not just women, but children. It's like nobody took child abuse seriously
Mhm,
until women started talking about their abuse, and then
mm,
child abuse. Um, she goes into the history of psychoanalysis, and she says that what happened with Freud, it's all documented, is, you know, he had all these clients. He was taking on all these patients in his practice, and the whole idea of sexual repression came later. What he was learning by working with all these women, including, and this is psychoanalysis, so this is, as far as I know, primarily upper class women, you know, to
right, yeah,
what he was discovering is when women were manifesting these symptoms that, you know, he would label neurosis or whatever, almost always they would say that they were molested by a relative or another man when they were a
mhm,
child, or on, or recent, you know, and it's like, and so what he realized is, if this were true, uh, is something, I think his number was something like 1 in 4 women in England at that time, had been sexually assaulted, including the upper class, and that was shocking because it was seen to be like a, you know, this wasn't something talked about, right? And,
yeah,
I would suspect that it's more like 1 in 1 personally.
right,
Um, but that was so disturbing to him that he decided, and of course would be so, there's no chance that psychoanalysis would be accepted if you had, talked, forget about putting the occult in with you. If you had mentioned that, nothing, it would have gone nowhere, right?
yeah,
And, so he concluded that they must be making it up, and that it was a repressed fantasy, and that from that he developed the theory of sexual repression, and neurosis is caused by sexual repression, which of course Reich took, you know,
yeah,
ran with in bizarre directions. Um, and that idea has been part of our culture ever since, and it's not just a lie; it's just it's a betrayal, I think.
yeah,
And so, and so, if we don't look back and see that, it's, you know, that's why psychoanalysis is poisoned at the root for me.
yeah, yeah. You know, it's funny you should say that because the pagan, neo-pagan group that I was involved with when I was 17, 18, it was very Freudian, and the guy who was running it had definitely read some Freud, and would say things that were clearly Freudian on reflection. He would say things like, "Well, you know, you always marry your mother." I was like, "I don't think so." You know,
Definitely not.
no,
Definitely not, yeah.
no,
Yeah.
and yeah, just weird things like that. But again, there was this weird sort of sexual, you know, advances on women that were slightly somewhat disguised, but at the same time there was this encouragement of women to be sexually liberated. I mean, it was a horrible failure for him. It never worked, but nevertheless it was kind of a weird atmosphere to be around.
I think that's kind of the fundamental, you know, pattern of psychoanalysis. And, uh, again, it's like, it's kind of like when you were mentioning, all we're all one. It's like, what is sexual repression, but, you know, your boundaries don't matter,
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, yeah,
which of course they do.
yeah,
And, And we can go from there to the psychologization of magic, which
Yeah.
for me, in many ways, um, magic but I think that male initiation, that one of the things about male initiation is that over time, if you can, it begins with initiation and magic allows you to more closely approximate female thinking if you can get past the scaffolds of it, just in the same
Mhm.
way that we've been talking about with the mystery and things like that.
Right.
And it's vice
Yeah.
versa for women, where they become more masculine in their thinking because
Right.
they're becoming larger, they're embracing more.
Yeah. That's
Um,
interesting. Yeah.
and that's at least been my observation.
Mm.
And but that doesn't mean that people should obviously leave behind their masculinity or
No.
femininity. It just means they have a
Yeah.
wider perspective.
Yeah.
Um, and and for me, psychology is another way of pinning the butterfly.
For sure. Definitely. I mean, I think that's absolutely what's happened in our culture. Yeah. So most spiritual practitioners or occult practitioners definitely think it's this internal psychological practice, or it's a kind of applied therapy. This idea, and I don't mean to parody anyone, although I do a little bit, but Lon Milo Duquette's, it's all in your head. You have no idea. You just have no idea how big your head is. Well, it's not all in your head, is it?
Mm.
Obviously. And then of course, if it's the case, then so it's all in my head. So you're in my head, but your head is in my head, which but your head is in my head, and your head is thinking of what's in my head, but that's also in your head, but that's in my head. It's just this sort of
Yeah.
hall of mirrors. It's just ridiculous.
Yeah, I used to get that in New York a lot, where it's like people play the mirror game, where it's like you state something and then somebody's like, well, you're just projecting that, it's like, and then it just becomes the endless hall of mirrors.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, yeah, interestingly, I talked to Lon about that specifically a long time ago, and I was able to pin him down on it. I was like, "What about the Goetia?" And he said, "Well, the Goetia, okay, the Goetia are real outside your head." I was like, "Okay, well, surely that would be the one thing you didn't want to be real outside your head." But okay.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
So I think that things may be more nuanced than that truism, and certainly, again, it's like you're all in my head. I'm not saying this about Lon, but again, it's your boundaries don't matter.
Right, exactly. Yeah, that is the danger of this sort of interpretation and the we're all one kind of interpretation of spirituality. Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
And with Jung in particular, I feel that Jung is man, Jung is I call him like the dead zone because with Jung, it's like he introduced the occult in a way that was
Hmm.
made sense to the public.
Yeah,
Right? It's like okay, you can look at the occult, but it's safe.
right.
Um, but you once you're there, you're stuck. Because
That's
once
it.
you cite
Yeah.
once everything's a Jungian archetype, once everything,
Yeah,
as you were saying, and you go to a therapist, it's like, well, that part of you was talking to you.
that's it.
And I've had that type of conversation with therapists as well. Um, you really can't go anywhere.
That's it.
And,
Yeah.
no offense, but I've met some Jungian therapists, and man, you want to meet some fucked up people.
Yeah. Well, that's right. And when I was reading about the Jungian anima, and I think that my impression of the anima was everybody else's impression that it's well, if you're attracted to a woman, that woman represents the female part of your own soul, and a woman who's attracted to a man, that represents the masculine part of her own soul. And but when I was really looking not only at Emma Jung's work, but I started listening to old lectures by early Jungian psychoanalysts, and then later Jungian therapists around today. And what quickly became apparent was that the anima or the animus is basically everything. So, and literally, it can be let's say the anima. It can be a woman you're attracted to, or it could be a teacher, it's a woman in some kind of authority. The anima is in fairy tales, of course. It can be a group of women as well. So a group of women could be your anima, and then it can even be a child or a child in a dream, and then behind all of these different animas, there is the great mother anima, that anima, she is molding them to her shape or whatever. And it's like, wait a minute, you're telling me that I walk along the street, there's an attractive woman, a group of women, a child, and that's other women of some authority. They can all be my anima. This is crazy.
It's a little solipsistic.
A little bit, yeah. And it's just,
Yeah.
and it can be just applied to anything. So anyone, any female could be your anima, or any male could be the animus. It's just too much and too amorphous, and it can be anything. And I think that's a real weakness. And what I also felt was the concept of the anima or animus, quite in contrast to what we think of as this mysterious thing, that ultimately what it was really about, it's a way of plugging you into society. So M.O. Jung would say, well, an undeveloped woman will be attracted to a man who's physical and does, physical work.
Sure
But
about this.
well, that's what she says. But then
Yeah.
once you have a animus, once you have a very once you have a highly developed animus, you will be attracted to an intellectual, maybe like
Like Carl
Professor
Jung.
Jung. Yeah, exactly. So strangely, and what I detect in that is partly some kind of hostility toward the working class, but also this
Yeah, yeah,
notion,
yeah, yeah.
yeah, there's this notion that, well, what the anima or the animus is really about is about getting you the best, getting you a good job, plugging you into society, making sure that you attract a high value mate. You want a professor or someone of influence. And she says at one point, which I found quite fascinating, she says, and the anima leads you to more and more consciousness, but there's this other anima and it leads away from consciousness and we don't know what it is. And I thought, well, that's probably the supernatural woman. This sounds much more
Hmm.
interesting if
Oh
only
yeah.
you had
Oh
explored
yeah.
it.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
interesting. It's very much I suppose it's more it's almost like a Brahmin caste thing. It's like an Indian like a
Yeah.
Brahmin caste in India. It's all about the upholding of society, whereas
Mhm.
the tantrics are on the other side of the tracks having fun, you know?
Right, right. Yeah,
Uh,
that's probably an element of that. That's right. And of course, it's difficult for us to really conceive how much class mattered in society 50 years ago or 100 years ago for sure. But yeah, so I felt that this was not what I thought it was. And it's interesting because she mentions Valkyries or wish maidens and she mentions the god Odin, but somehow it's all this magical stuff is just to plug you into society. And
Interesting.
yeah, and I kind of wanted to go outside of society. Where's this
All
other
right.
anima taking me? Where's this
Right.
weird anima taking me
Well,
away from consciousness?
you can't be initiated if you deny the fact that there's anything outside you. What is there to initiate you?
Right. And also you need some kind of radical break with civilization in a certain way. I mean, I'm very much involved with civilization as a writer or an artist or whatever. But at the same time, and this is especially the case with artistic geniuses or literary geniuses, there's also some kind of break with civilization as well, where the primordial and the primal can come through. I guess because uh, civilization for people who are not involved with creating in some way is often a kind of mask that papers over the primal, right?
Mm,
But
mhm.
real art or real magical experience, maybe even real religious experience, there is some sort of gap that the primal comes through. And goodness me, think of Catholic saints and how strange they are, you know.
Oh, absolutely. I
Yeah.
mean, you get a lot of, even in the big big religions, you get the crazy wisdom traditions.
Yeah.
Like in the Russian Orthodox Church, I forget what they were called, but there was a group that Rasputin was actually part of this order or sect in the
Right,
Russian
that's right.
Orthodox Church that was like the crazy
Yeah,
ones, you know.
the castrati, I think it was, or something like that, right?
I'm not sure Rasputin was castrated, but it was it was like he may have been. It was like more like Drukpa Cunley or like the divine the what you're like you're so drunk on God you go
Right.
completely out of your mind and start doing all this
Yeah.
bizarre behavior that doesn't make sense to anybody. And you know, I think that for me the you know the path of initiation is you have to make a break with society. Most of us don't have a choice, right? Because most of
Mhm.
us are marked from youth in some
Yeah.
way that we're not gonna jive with society, whatever that is.
Yeah.
Uh, and um, but the path of initiation, which is the same as the path of shamanism, it's like you have to just you got to go out into the desert, but
Ye
then you got to come back and
That's
bring
right.
you know and you know become of service to your tribe.
Yeah, that's it. Well, there's a British historian, he's dead now, but Arnold Toynbee, and he talks
Mhm.
uh, about the mystic and the creative minority who renews civilization. And the mystic is an artist, but in a sense, he has this revelation, and then he goes forth, or he goes into the wilderness, has this revelation, and then goes back into civilization or into society and gathers this creative minority that retransforms the civilization, renews it in some way, which is what he says is different to tribal societies where they try and just keep following the rules of the ancestors and never change.
Hmm. I think that that's true. I think that, you know, particularly when you approach that from the standpoint of the traditions, you understand that what people are discovering when they go out into the woods or into the desert isn't new. They're discovering the
That's it.
same thing that everyone
Yeah,
else has discovered, but it has to be rediscovered because it has to be re-articulated for people where they are now.
that's right. Totally. Yeah,
You know, more
exactly.
people are gonna listen to us talking on YouTube than, you know, are gonna read, you know, a book in Latin from 500 years
Oh
ago.
yeah, for sure, definitely. Yeah, and I think that is one of many weaknesses about Rene Guénon's traditionalism. That in his view, that all you had to do was just move into a religion and then slavishly adhere to it. So, and if you listen to traditionalists, they'll say, "Oh, well, originally there was the sacred art, and then it sort of degenerates from sacred art, which is geometrical symbols or whatever, so you get to religious art, where it's paintings of scenes of the crucifixion or whatever it may be, that's already degenerate. And we just need to keep going back and then, I don't know, painting icons forever or painting geometric shapes, and that would be it. And you could never deviate from that because then you would deviate from this primordial tradition. But this is ridiculous.
Yeah,
Things need to be
yeah.
renewed in all kinds of interesting ways.
In the same way that we were talking about at the beginning of the conversation, you know, about the neo-pagan revival, it's like, you know, let's say with ruins, right? Like, can we really trace
Mhm.
this back? We could trace it back to Germany, the turn of the century. I mean, we
Mm.
could go back to um, the 60s, Stephen Flowers, Rudengill, all this stuff. And it's like, yeah, there's literally no historical connection with the tradition whatsoever. And a lot of it was
Right.
fabricated. But does that matter?
Right.
Does that matter?
Exactly.
Because isn't rediscovering it and re-articulating it upholding it part of the tradition, you know, isn't that part of it?
Yeah.
And, uh, yeah, so that's an interesting one. I think that's yeah, Gnon, I think Gnon is a fascinating writer. He is a real it's like he's very much like alchemical salt. You know,
Yes.
he'll
Yeah.
really
Yes.
sober you up, and he's such a he, cuts against the grain. It takes the
Mhm.
sandpaper, takes it the other way, and people should definitely read Renee Guénon, I think, but I agree with you. I mean, it's like at the end of the day, this idea that there was some golden age is just as much horseshit as this idea in the past. Is just as much horseshit as in this idea that there's going to be this Marxist paradise in the future.
Yeah.
That we're
Yeah.
progress. We're here now. We've always been here now. It's probably much closer to something like Nietzsche's eternal return. I think.
Yeah.
In terms of the traditions, the religions, all that, people are talking about it being in the past, but it's happening now, right? Because
That's it.
people are
Yeah.
interpreting these things into their lives and overlaying their symbol sets onto their experiences, whether it's
Yeah.
evangelical Christianity
Mhm.
whatever, or esoteric Vajrayana or whatever. It's like that it's happening now.
Yeah.
And the only reason the future or the past matters is as a reference point for the present. And so
Yeah.
I think that ultimately I depart completely, I think, from both the left and right wing interpretations of magic.
Yeah.
This idea that
Good.
we're progressing is a lie. This idea that we are, degenerating is a lie. Both of those
Mhm.
things are happening. But
Yeah.
look around, if you look at our world now, people are living and there's infinite realities. You could be you could be dying on a street in India as an untouchable, or you could be a kid making seven figures reviewing toys on YouTube or some nonsense.
Yeah.
And all that's happening at the same time is that it's again the whole idea of aeonic progression is a non-starter for me. Because
Yeah.
it's like, there's people who are having experiences that are supposedly from, the Aeon of Isis or Osiris all over the planet. Or it's like everyone's in their own kind of we have a multiplicity of realities, and that for me is so much more interesting than these big aeonic narratives or ideas of that people can even understand time at all. You know?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I've written about this concept of aeons, which shows up in all kinds of traditions and in all kinds of ways. The interesting thing about it, I think, is that if you boiled them all down, they would be saying that things are getting worse for civilization or societies, but getting better for the individual, which might be true, at least where we are.
Well, I mean, it may be true, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
It may be true. I think that,
Yeah.
isn't that that's the sales pitch of religion in the first place?
Yeah. It could
In
be.
ways, I think that I had an interesting experience. Even with the book of the law, it's like you can look in one way at the book of the law, which PS I've been working on with AI and is almost surely nonsense and horseshit. But and there's no code. Every time everyone's ever figured out a code, it was overlaying on top of it. But that's a topic for another day. But there's a sense where it's like much like Christianity would have been a route through in some ways the horrors of the last 2,000 years. This type of
Yeah.
path may be describing the horror that is to come, but it is also
Mm.
prescribing a way through it, which is
Mhm.
valid, whatever the provenance of the book. The idea of following your true will, following your star and
Yeah.
respecting everyone else, that will
Yeah.
get you through so much of the nonsense that is thrown at you by the world.
Yeah.
And so I think that I think that these things are valuable in that sense, and I think that is, isn't that what we want, right? We want a path that is gonna be more
Yeah.
healthy and integrated and successful for us than what we see around us, which is just disintegration,
Yeah, for
right? And
sure.
that's not necessarily time-based, it's just people being people, I think, but
Yeah. Yeah.
alright, well, we how long have we been talking? We're almost at 2 hours.
Oh, wow.
Um, I don't wanna, there's probably more we should touch on your book if you wanna, make sure
Yeah,
that we
I mean, that would be
that we
great for sure. I
yeah,
was
yeah, that
shooting
we
the
make sure that
breeze.
we touch on to make sure things we should make sure we touch on.
Yeah, sure.
What do you think?
We should probably talk a little bit about the mythology and then maybe, yeah, a little bit about the mythology and tales behind it. And yeah,
Okay, let's talk
is it
about that.
real? Yeah,
Is it real?
yeah.
And what are the mythology and tales around it?
around the supernatural woman.
Yes.
Yeah, so I explore it really from ancient Greece through Norse mythology into Middle English literature, and it's quite curious that as I said at the beginning, it is often associated with oracular speech or poetic speech, and with the character as well as dreams and death. But uh, if you look at, say, well, let's say the Norse myth of Bolverk, which is sort of in a way a kind of central point in the book because it brings things together. I see a lot of similarities to ancient Greek conceptions and mythology in the Bolverk myth. uh, which doesn't necessarily mean that ancient Greece was the origin, but it may go back to some Indo-European tradition, or maybe there's some influence of ancient Greece on there. But Bolverker or Odin, Bolverker being the name he gives himself, misfortune worker. To cut a long story short, penetrates into this mountain where he finds this giantess, and the giantesses and giants are sometimes regarded as gods or goddesses in a kind of disguise. But he finds this giantess and lays with her for 3 nights. And then on a golden stool, she gives him the drink of the poetic mead, which is the mead that if you get a drop of it, it will transform you into a poet, which really means, of course, magician. And he swallows it, turns himself into an eagle, and flies away. But so this union of the god and the giantess leads to him now possessing this magical mead, which can turn people into magicians or poets. And this is something you find, in a sense, in ancient Greece, where a nympholept, a male devotee of a nymph would become possessed by the nymph, and when she possessed him, he would speak in a much more poetic, or even in an oracular way. And even in one of Plato's dialogues, Socrates says, "Oh, I'm speaking much more poetically because you've mischievously exposed me to the nymph that lives around here," which we today would think is very sort of poetic and metaphoric, and it couldn't be taken as real. But to that culture, it was real, and that's why
Yeah,
you.
Plato's pretty wild.
Yeah,
Some of that stuff's pretty wild if you look at it.
yeah.
Yeah.
Plato at college, not so wild, but Plato
Mhm.
outside of college, yeah, the things you're probably not going to learn there, yeah, it's quite odd and quite
Mhm.
interesting. But yeah, even the Iliad or begins with this invocation of the goddess, the muse, and this is a real thing. Being possessed by the goddess or the muse, or the nymph, or in a sense, the giantess, who then is able to transform your consciousness, is a real thing. That I won't go through the whole story because it's quite long, but in Chaucer's Canterbury Tales, there's a really interesting tale called "The Wife of Bath," which I include in the book. And there's essentially a knight, and it's a terribly degenerate knight who has no problem abusing women. Is going to be he's found guilty of a crime, a horrific crime against a woman, and is condemned to death. But the women of King Arthur's castle, where he is tried, say plead and say, "Oh no, let him off, and if he can discover what women really want within the next year, then then he'll will spare his life." The tale was actually the inverse of Sir Gawain and the Green Knight, which was written
Mhm.
around the same time. So it's kind of unclear to me whether Chaucer was inverting Sir Gawain and the Green Knight, or Sir Gawain and the Green Knight was inverting Chaucer. But to cut a long story short, so he comes across these beautiful women that are dancing around the edge of a forest, which from the prologue tells us that these are fairies. And he moves towards them, they vanish into thin air, and there was this ugly, hideous old hag there, the most hideous hag that anyone could ever imagine. And she tells him the secret of what women really want. They get married. She kind of teases
What is
him.
the secret?
The secret is that, well, the secret of what women really want is that they want dominion over their husbands. Although later on, it's kind of revealed that maybe they want husbands to have dominion over them, and it's an equal relationship. That they don't really want to beat the husband down. That's what one would conclude from the ending.
It's
But
almost like this. It's almost like the sexes need each other.
yeah, who'd have thought?
I know, right?
Almost, almost like evolution is a real thing.
I know it's a very scandalous statement these days.
It is.
Um,
Yeah.
Fascinating.
Yeah. But
Go, go ahead.
yeah, so it's kind of long story short. So he's horrible to her, and then she berates him, shows him all his flaws. She's a Christian, although because all the fairies have converted to Christianity by this point, we learn. And then he accepts her dominion over him, and then she transforms herself into a beautiful woman and is faithful to him. But I think what's interesting about that, one, he's an ugly character on the inside, she's ugly. And when he's transformed into a beautiful person on the inside, now she transforms into a beautiful woman. So there is this, for thousands of years, there's this connection of the character and this nymph type figure or fairy or giantess or whatever it might be expressed as.
I think that's beautiful and very true. Uh,
Yeah.
and it leads me to ask too, of all these things you've looked at, whether it's your own experience or, um, all these cultural frames, stories, myths, what have you found have been the most repeating themes, particularly the ones that would be of most importance to people now?
Yeah, well, I think it is development of the character in some way. So another myth, that of Sigurd the Dragon Slayer, is that he's wandering around in nature in a way sort of aimless and comes across this mountain with the ring of fire over it, and he penetrates the ring of fire and finds this Valkyrie, and she teaches him magic, but she also teaches him how to behave in the world. That in a sense, she orders his life, but it's not the key is not so much, okay, here's the magic. It's also that here's how you behave, that this is how you have a character, that this is what you should do. And that if you do this, it's going to keep you from disaster. And, I was at a Masonic, I gave a talk at a Masonic lodge a few months ago. And as you know, there's endless degrees that you can take, all of the Scottish Rite, the York Rite, the Knight Masons, all of these invitational bodies on top of that. And if that's not enough, you can join the Martinists and then the Golden
Don't
Dawn.
forget the
And
Shriners, you can do that too.
you can do the Shriners if you can, and the Grotto.
Yeah, 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 yeah.
And and I said, is this really what initiation is about? Just taking more and more degrees? And I said, I don't think it is. I don't think it is. And I said, look, if you're initiated into some kind of male society, that it's pretty much implicit that it's going to lead you into one or two things, right? At least historically. One is going to be war, or one is going to be integrated into society, which means basically getting married and having a family. And so metaphysically, these things we would expect, at least for some people, would also show up in dreams or whatever have you. So that we should initiate should not be, okay, I need to take all 33 degrees of the Scottish Rite and then another 10 or 13 of the York Rite and then the other ones, and then once I've taken 50 or 60 degrees, I'll start to have collected all of the symbols and all of the different nuanced descriptions of them, and then I'll know the secrets. Is that no? This is supposed to be transformative of your consciousness. That's what you're supposed to be aiming at. And maybe for a certain type of person, who's more spiritually inclined, these things will show up in dreams as well. And maybe that's some kind of spiritual internal war, or maybe that's the revelation of some kind of supernatural woman, or for women, maybe a supernatural man that appears and transforms the consciousness in a very radical way.
Mm.
At least
That's what,
history would suggest that.
yeah. Um, I had a wild experience in a Masonic lodge. Um, you'll appreciate this. This must have been 10, 15 years ago, maybe. And it was one of the open stated meetings. I think public was invited to, but it was I'd done everything you described. Not invitational bodies or anything, but Scottish Rite, York Rite. It
Right.
was a
Yeah.
lot, right? And even that's just a lot.
Hmm.
Um, and so I was like, okay, I have all my degrees now. What now? You know, and
Yeah.
but we had a stated meeting where they had the entertainment. They had invited a belly dancer. Right, and this was all clean. It was all very tasteful, respectful, nothing overtly sexual, things like that. But basically, they had this Masonic lodges off Fairfax. They have in LA, so it was Masonic lodge with all these Jewish guys in their 70s and 80s, and their wives were there too, and all of that. But you have, someone who's is Babylon, right, doing the belly dance in the middle of the lodge. I'm like, "This is phenomenal. This is great," it's like, it's like even John Dee, you get to the end, it's like Babylon appears. It's like this is a phenomenal, symbolic demonstration of a principle at work.
Right.
Um,
Wow.
but, I think that message, what you said, uh, about character, yeah, I mean, that's what particularly young men need to hear that. And it's because I think you see now, I mean, like people, men in general, not just young men, but men in general have the sense now that they're owed. They're owed a
Right.
partner. They're owed a
Yeah. Yeah.
you see them like doing this, trying to start to act like the Taliban, some of them. And and they have all these bizarre ideas about life and reality from porn. And this idea
Right.
that they have total access to anything. And that, you know, and then they're miserable. And I think that
Mm.
some of them get in. You see people like I don't know if you follow like what's his name, Clavicular, the looks maxing guy.
Oh no, I don't know.
Okay, but all best you don't. But you see with the young men, this is eternal. It's like they struggle to develop themselves, but they get into um, I have to achieve. I have to
Yeah.
impress people with my achievements, or I have to
Mhm,
look the
mhm.
best, or I have to work out as much as possible, and it's all superficial. And the message they don't get is actually that's not what women are really interested in.
Yeah.
Developing your character is, and this message, this eternal message that you're mentioning is true, and people need to hear it. I think young men,
Yeah.
particularly now, need to hear it.
Yeah. Well, I think, what you're saying, it strikes me, or has struck me even since childhood, that boys in particular, young men, often want to be known as sort of extreme in some way. Like, oh,
Yeah,
he's
of
he's
course.
he's the guy who's really crazy about soccer, or he's the guy who's sort of fanatical about some philosophy and is going to speak to you only in this sort of philosophical way that you can barely understand, whatever it is. And they kind of feel that if they're extreme about something, that gives them a personality, and it probably does, but it doesn't develop your character. That's something else.
Mm. Well, it can lead to giving you a career and a role in the world,
Hmm.
and it's important to be fanatical and obsessive about things, and
For sure.
as long as it's legitimate to who you really are.
Yeah.
I feel we should mention before we go. I feel we can't not mention that Peter Carroll has passed,
Oh, yeah. That's right. Yeah.
and I think it was just a few weeks ago, or maybe I've lost track of time,
Yeah. It's probably
but
about 6 weeks ago at this point. But yeah, that's right. And he initiated me into the IoT, not because I was terribly important, but because he happened to come from Bristol that day to London, so he was the initiating officer, which is pretty cool to remember, and it was quite a great ritual and very memorable. But yeah, I spoke to him. I don't know if I met him. I don't know if he came again, maybe one time after that. I'm not sure. I might be conflating that the two nights into one, or thinking that one night was two. But and I spoke to him on the phone once after that. And actually, I was emailing with him last year. I was actually planning to go and visit him, but it didn't work out. But
Mm.
yeah, but yeah, I mean, yeah, and I mean, it's a curious character. I mean, he certainly did. He did achieve. Did achieve something. I think with Lebanon Psychonaut in particular, and founding the IoT. And when I was initiated that night, and I've read it in his writings since then. You know, he said that the IoT would be to the 20th century or 21st century what the Golden Dawn was to the 20th, and that seemed kind of stupid and crazy at one point. But I think it is partly true.
Well, we're both sitting here talking.
Yeah, but that's right. Yeah, yeah,
I think he's right about that. And
yeah,
I think that I think that Peter Carroll was vastly underappreciated. I think that for the life of me, I don't understand why people go to Phil Hine instead of Peter Carroll to learn
right.
about chaos magic. But
Yeah,
I really don't. But
yeah,
I think his ideas of creative occultism and whatever you think of his math, but this idea the of creative occultism in that way, people still haven't wrapped their minds around that. It's like we've been talking, they wanna, like, do it by
yeah,
the book, they wanna do it the old way, they don't
yeah.
want to step out of that comfort zone, and, I don't know if I just picked up his book, is it Epoch or it's the big purple
Oh
one,
yeah,
that you know that
right.
one? Have you
With the
read that?
cards, right? I haven't.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I just started looking at it in his introduction, he talks a bunch about Mathers, and he says Mathers is a great occult figure, not Crowley, and Mathers was the one who did the synthesis that led to the whole thing,
right.
and he's right about that, I think,
Yeah,
and that at least in that book, that what he was trying to do is update Mathers' work.
right.
I think that his ideas are still people haven't caught up with them, they're still revolutionary. We went from the chaos magic scene of the early IoT days in the 2000s into the Grimoire revival.
Yeah,
People trying to do everything the old way by the book. It's like, what?
yeah,
That is so much less interesting.
yeah. It is. I think so. Anyway. Yeah,
Yeah, I mean, it's
yeah.
cool too. And it's
Mm.
like the thing about, the chaos magic perspective is like, yeah, let's do it. Let's see what happens. But not
Yeah.
let's make a whole personality out of it.
No, that's right. Yeah, yeah.
So I don't know if you have any good Peter Carroll stories or memories, but
No, only being initiated by him. That was really, yeah, which was quite amazing. I mean, the first meeting was really great. I mean, we did a ritual. I think it was to Uranus, but I'm not sure. But I
mm,
think it was to Uranus. But yeah, and so we were wearing our black robes and spinning around with our arms out like this, and it was like whirling dervishes, and it was like visually very striking, very memorable and impressive, but very simple as well.
I remember, I don't know if Peter Carroll was involved in this, but when I was in the UK, the IoT there had told me that I think they're at like 98 or so, 97, 98. Um, Tons of people in the gay community in London were dying of AIDS. May have been slightly earlier
Right,
than that.
probably a little earlier. Yeah,
It was probably must have been
yeah,
earlier. Yeah, I'm
yeah.
probably getting the dates wrong, but they had asked, they knew of the IoT and they'd asked them to do a ritual. So they did
Mm,
this. They came out and I think Dave Lee was part of it. So they that and they
right.
drawn out. They drew out this whole sigil on the dance floor and had the entire
Oh,
neighborhood
yeah.
dancing on it.
Right,
And then
right.
and then after that, the crisis abated and it seemed to have worked or at least aligned with it.
Mm,
Like that's phenomenal. That's what magic should be. That's
yeah.
phenomenal. Not what were they? What was some 17-year-old edgelord writing down in a cave in 1623. But anyways,
Yeah.
where can people find out more about your work? And do you still have a public practice?
Yeah, well, the public practice I'm sort of reinventing at the moment, but I will do at some point. But people can find out about me on my website, which is angelmillar.com, or the book is available, Supernatural Woman and the Male Initiate, Bonded
Right
Through
here.
Dreams.
Get it.
Yes.
Get it. Get it. Highly
Yeah.
recommended.
Thank you.
Right.
Yeah, that's available in pretty much in all good bookshops from Amazon, Barnes and Noble, or other countries, Waterstones, or whatever there is there. That's pretty easy to get a hold of. But yeah, if they want to find out more about me, go to my website, which is just my name.com.
Well, thank you very much for
Thank
speaking.
you.
This is
Yeah,
great.
it's been
It'll be up on YouTube soon.
great. It's been good speaking with you.
You as well.